All right, guys. Special hot off the presses edition of Into the Spoilerverse this week because and I'm actually really looking forward to this because usually what we get to do is we have a few days decompress, we'll do a bit of research ourselves, look into Easter eggs and stuff like that as well, but real life and fun plans have come in the way this time, but actually that's created an exciting opportunity for us to jump on literally, like, you know, for Dan it's minutes after watching the latest episode of Secret Invasion. For me it's been a couple of hours, but we're going to talk, basically we're just going to talk fresh. We're going to release this early as well. Like, if you're listening on the podcast as normal, you're listening the usual time, it's no different, but we are going to release this early on YouTube, so you get early access to it as well and be able to read it closer to the episode. Guys, we are stepping into the Spoilerverse for Secret Invasion episode 5, and joining me as always is our Marvel guy. It is the one, the only Dan. Line. Yeah, I think I might
It's
actually
getting
get
better
better
every
now.
week.
Yeah, every week it's going to go. Now we only have 1 week of this left, so I hope to pull it all together by next week. But Dan, how are you? I understand you're kind of you've got some time off to yourself and you're reading a lot, you're binging a lot of comics. Is there anything in particular you'd like to kind of recommend for anyone, particularly people who might be listening to us and might like to kind of get into comics? And is there anything in particular on your radar?
Definitely. Well, I always have 2 books on the go every single time I'm reading something. And what I just finished is, in my opinion, the greatest superhero comic ever, which I've read numerous times, which is Batman's Hush. If you've never read this, I highly recommend reading it. But to get the best out of it, just read some of the kind of classic Batman stuff first, and you'll really get like a real kick from it. So, Death in the Family, Long Halloween, Dark Victory, the classic titles like that, a few bits of Superman here and there, and then go read Hush. Honest to God, it's probably the best superhero comic that's ever been written. That's very disputable, but that's in my opinion, and as far as the mainstream stuff goes. And what I am also reading as well is La Muerta, which is by Coffin Comics, which is my favorite comic book company. La Muerta is excellent. Think The Punisher meets The Crow, set in a Mexican noir sort of setting, and you've got an idea of what it's about, throwing a bit of supernatural stuff. Amazing art by Joe Gomez. And actually, one thing that's kind of interesting about this cover, I picked this up during the week, is the cover artist, Paolo Pantalina, has just received a lot of negative backlash from the community, which ties into something in Secret Wars, which is AI art. So he's a widely celebrated artist, a massive fan of his work. I have a lot of his covers, but he's after creating what seems like a database of his own work, and he's generating his own AI work, which he submitted to Coffin Comics. And because of, even though his own assets he's using, because it was AI art, the entire community said, we're not really interested in this, and they actually pulled him as a featured artist. So that's the first time now that I'm aware of that there's been a serious AI art implication that's affected the comic book community. And it looks like, unfortunately, from what the publisher Brian Pulido of Coffin Comics has said, it doesn't look like he's going to come back in the near future. Wow. So we're seeing genuine impact of AI art on the comic industry now. And this is only this week. This was, what day are we? We're Wednesday, so it would have been at the weekend, yeah.
Okay, well, that's really, like, I know obviously seriously talented artists that you're a fan of, but like the fact that you can see action so quickly, it's almost inspirational when you look at the likes of Hollywood, who are like, yeah, we're just going to dig in our heels and wait it out here. Like, well, actors now going on strike and everything is basically ground to a halt. So it is interesting to see one industry kind of going along with the public's wishes and the public narrative, and interesting to see the public kind of coming together as a community to kind of influence that change as well. So fingers crossed we can get more, because I think, yeah, we're all very much the same page. We don't want to live in a world where AI is created. Just look how bad the intro is for this show. For example, Secret Invasion, not ours. There's 0% AI here. Anyway, guys, we are about to discuss episode 5. And guys, as always, you are not in a safe zone if you're looking to avoid spoilers. This is called Into the Spoilerverse, this section. So we're going to be talking about everything from Secret Invasion. We're going to be talking about everything from the MCU up to date. We're going to be bringing in some comics canon, as you can kind of see, but also as well, the idea that is not to spoil. We want you, like, look, we're promoting comics. We want you to read them. We want to enjoy them for yourselves. So we're not going to be giving away deliberate plot points, but we're also going to enhance your viewing enjoyment with a bit of Easter eggs or a bit of context, maybe about characters or stuff that's happened or things that are similarities in the comics or differences and so on. What we're going to do to get started, as we always are, is to put ourselves back into the mindset of watching the show and to recap it, which is very fresh in our memories. We watched it literally in the past few hours. So if we don't get this right, well, what hope is there for any of us? Guys, we're going to do it with our alternate recap for episode 5, and it is called Harvest. And for someone who was director of S.H.I.E.L.D., Fury would be an absolutely terrible bouncer. He arrives at the hospital with President Richard ready to guard him with his life, only for Rhodey to show up and Fury, knowing he's a Skrull, by the way, to walk off immediately the second Rhodey said, "I'm gonna tell on you." Gravik's followers are losing patience with him after he kills Pagon for questioning him. If you ever thought you had a snake friend, think about this. Gravik has now killed his 2 bestos in almost consecutive weeks. Why is everyone on this show so shit? Talos is a shit negotiator, Fury is a shit bodyguard, and Gravik is a shit mate. You know who's not shit though? Sonya. And finally she's back in the show, is infinitely better for it. She kills 2 Skrulls with 1 bullet, hunting out her rat as well as tracking down Dr. Dalton, all while being badass and charismatic and talking about podcasts and gaslighting and murder. And by the way, I would well listen to a Sonya Falter podcast. That would be right up my alley with Olivia Colman presented. I'm just saying, Marvel, that is technically content you could release now, and even with the strike, I think. So yeah, I'd be well up for that. Meanwhile, the fridging apology tour continues as Skrulisi met Priscilla, who helped her bury Talos, and they talked just long enough to pass the Bechdel test, so the writers can be like, no, all that killing women, we don't hate women. Look, they're talking to each other and sharing the scene. They use the arsenal of guns and bulletproof vests that are, of course, available in Nick Fury's home to fend off against Skrull invaders sent to kill them. Gravik changes the plan and has Rhodey tell Richard when he wakes up that Skrulls are here and working with Russia. Then tells Fury he's willing to call the whole thing off if Fury can give him whatever the harvest is. In response, Fury dresses up as a character from Mission Impossible, wearing some old Finnish lad's face, and meets Sonya, where he reveals that he had Skrulls harvest Avenger DNA that they're using to make themselves Super Skrulls. So technically, all of this is kind of his fault, but he needs to be the one to stop them because simply they don't have the budget for real superheroes, and that's just the reality of it. Financial concerns coming into play. So perhaps for one last time, he dots the eye patch and tells someone that it's time to finish this. Then the credits rolled and Disney Plus suggested we all watch Captain Marvel. So I wonder who that someone is going to be. And ladies and gentlemen, that is episode 5 of Secret Invasion. That is Harvest. Dan, it's been said in a lot of TV shows that the penultimate episode of a series is often better than the main episode. If that is to be true here, is that a good thing or a bad thing? We know we've had mixed feelings about this show, not quite thinking that it's absolutely terrible, but also not kind of thinking it's very memorable either. How did this settle in terms of, like, you know, setting the series and kind of, you know, setting up the finale as well?
Yep, I agree with that. I always think the penultimate episodes are usually by and far better. Once again, that's like compared to wrestling, as we do. The hot tag or the comeback is always more exciting than the finish. It gets a bigger reaction in most cases anyway. So that's what this is. This is the comeback. This is just after the double down. And yeah, I actually really enjoyed this episode, and it felt more like a Marvel sort of endeavor. But what I do think it should have been called Harvest is not accurate. Can we please talk about how it should be called Grime and Volvo? Because that's what, like, Sonya was driving and listening to. Come on, that was awesome. A geography teacher's car with hardcore British rap. You were talking about a podcast. I'm gonna go get drunk with her and play bongos.
There you go. Maybe like a Glastonbury DJ set in like a midnight rave tent. Like, yeah, I'd be up for that. Like, yeah, Sonya is badass. Like, she's the coolest mom you could ever wish to have, to be honest. Like, yeah, I agree. This was a really strong episode, and the best of the series so far by a considerable distance.
Yeah.
A lot of people have been saying, and I don't disagree with this, because again, not terrible, but it just feels like this should have probably been a movie rather than a TV series. You know what I mean? Because there's a lot of baggy stuff here that's kind of weighing it out. And when we see it actually get down to action, when it gets down to what this is at its core, it's quite good. Like the actions, and I've got faith ahead of next week. You know, I think we will discuss it. Are we destined for like a typical Marvel superhero big battle kind of finale? Yeah, probably, but there is some story there. So I am optimistic the next week can kind of pull it all together. But I think that's what we're learning from this. When this gets down to business and when it doesn't have to fill a runtime. I think the problem with the last few weeks is that they've been filling a runtime. They're like, we've got to do 40 minutes to an hour. So a lot of that means long series of dialogue, which again, not bad, but like, is it essential? Is it something that we feel they could have edited out if they were kind of picking, this is a 2.5 hour project, and would this have made the final cut or any derivation of it? Probably a lot of it would have been missed out. So yeah, I think this was really positive and all, and I am kind of hopeful towards heading into the last episode. Let's get into some of the beats of the episode though. We have Gravik, for example. He seems to be facing a revolution now, to the point that he's willing to just essentially burn down the whole lot and kind of go a different route and go full Super Skrull. And is it just me though, or have they kind of made Gravik a little bit less intimidating this week, seeing his guys getting to beat on him? I know he obviously won the fight and he had to, but again, they had him down for a considerable amount of time, and also just having to change the plan. He seems a little rattled. He seems a little unsure of himself. I'm not sure that you necessarily want your main villain to be on the ropes as much as he kind of is now. Or am I missing it? Am I missing the point? Is he actually more dangerous because he's in fuck it mode? Like, how are you feeling about Gravik?
It's a good point, actually. Ned, you've said it. Like I said, we're very fresh off this. Is probably as fresh as we've been coming into an episode and analyzing it. So that's a really good point, which I didn't think of. What I thought was while watching it is that this episode allowed Gravik to really establish himself as just a really ruthless villain in this setting. One quote that I love from Alec Ross, a really highly regarded comic book artist, is he always says the one thing you have to understand about writing a good villain is from the villain's perspective, they're the hero, they're doing the right thing. Sometimes though, that's not always the case, and you will get a hero who's just out for vengeance. Like another quote to counteract that is Michael Caine's one from The Dark Knight, which is some men just want to watch the world burn. So you've got your villain dynamic in between those two things, and Gravik has gone from seeing himself as a liberator to being some sort of nihilist. Like his army doesn't matter anymore. Maybe the power's gone to his head, which is a very obvious trope in comic books. I have power now. I don't need assistance. And like just a great example of that would be the Green Goblin from the original Tobey Maguire Spider-Man movie. How he just eliminated everyone once he got the Goblin power. And Gravik kind of gave me that sort of feeling as well in this episode. This whole thing, killing his own people and everything, it's been used as a mechanic to really establish himself as a super villain, like as in the way that he doesn't care what the path to his goal is, that he is willing to sacrifice his own people and everything like that just to get what he wants. So everyone else's help and stuff like that, it's trivial at this stage. So he has like established himself as the central threat, and once again, it goes to making maybe sure the Skrulls are seen as the refugees that they actually are, and not invading, tyrants or whatever.
I think some of the issue I guess I have with it, and again, I don't have huge issues. I think it's very salvageable. We just haven't seen much of the power scale yet. You know what I mean? We haven't seen, the way sometimes at the start of every superhero movie, you see the new villain come out and they usually fight the central hero, and they usually beat the central hero to go, oh shit, they can beat Iron Man, so they must be.
The shit has not hit the fan.
Yeah, we've just never seen that. We've seen him just beat normal people, so we don't know how strong he is. So. Again, if we understood how strong he was, we'd be like, oh, he's just not afraid because the people are holding him back. They're a threat to him, so he doesn't care about them. So I guess we might see that. We probably will see that next week. And if we don't see it next week, we're just not going to see it. So I suppose they might right this ship.
I think the first time they actually showed Super Skrull's powers, I can't remember the cartoon or if this was actually in the 90s cartoon, the comic book or the cartoon. But it was basically Super Skrull one-on-one with the Fantastic Four in the middle of Times Square. So you have like the audience, you have that Godzilla level of destruction if you want it, and you get to take on like four of the most powerful heroes in comic lore at the time. Nice. And going toe to toe with them. So you're right. We haven't seen, because like Super Skrull's a hokey name. The Skrulls themselves are a bit 1960s sci-fi opera looking. So we need something to really establish them as proper villains, because Captain Marvel didn't do it, but we talked about it before, and I like how it showed them as refugees. Because like I said before, I was as a kid, I always felt a little bit sad for the Skrulls because they just didn't seem as malicious as what like kind of was dealt with them. That they didn't seem like the bad guys they should have been, and that really, in my opinion, only in the last 20 years has become a thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, we need to measure Gravik's scale of power as he exists right now, and that's going to happen in the last episode. So like you said, that's a bit of a flop.
Yeah. And look, again, something they can easily write, like one scene they can have, Gaia hulks up, I suppose, and then he absolutely destroys Gaia, and then it has to be Danvers who comes in the same day. But we'll discuss all those kind of theories as we go on. But kind of to that point about the Skrulls, and I agree with that. And I think that's something the show's done actually quite fairly in being very empathetic towards the Skrulls. I remember the quote. I can't remember where the quote comes from off the top of my head, but it's like, if someone's drowning, are you going to be angry with them? They're drowning. You know what I mean? If they're drowning and they try to pull you in with them, are you going to be angry with them? No, because they're drowning. And I think that's kind of what the Skrulls are. They're desperate at this stage, and they've had their promises broken, and they've done everything that they've been asked to do. And 30 years has passed. So I do understand that. And kind of they allowed us to empathize with them. I know these are kind of on the good guy side at the moment, but like we got to spend extended time with Priscilla and Gaia, and see their characters kind of fleshed out. Did this work for you in terms of, because there were two characters who definitely needed that fleshing out? Are we kind of where we need to be with these two characters, or are we on the way? How did this settle for you?
I think so, and the reason why I would say so is because once again, Sonya's like treading the line between a narrator and comic relief, and it suits her character perfectly. She is progressing the story a lot when you see how much exposition she's giving. When it comes to Gaia, I think the whole thing about her is we've seen a quick snippet into what her power level is when she could, essentially regenerate from being shot directly in the chest. So I think the big struggle, as much as it looks like it is going to be Carol Danvers, like you said, I got the thing as well, like, the prompt as soon as it ended. Would you like to watch Captain Marvel? I was like, should I watch Captain Marvel? Don't necessarily want to, but not so subtle a hint is.
Yeah.
But I think the big smackdown is going to be between Gravix and Gaia, and we haven't seen her power yet. We've only seen those snippets. Does she have the exact same power as Gravix? Has the Groot DNA manifested him more, which we've seen him use a lot? And then is Cole's DNA, for example, going to be very prevalent in a Gaia? Like, are her fists going to become massive, big, pale chunks of meat like we saw in Avengers Endgame and Infinity War? And is she going to be able to pummel him? Or is she going to go full-blown Johnny Storm and ignite the extremists? Or even Sue Storm, and maybe it looks like they're doing a frost element as opposed to invisibility thing, but that would explain maybe shields and stuff like that. So it's going to be interesting going to see what they do with the mythology of their powers. Is it more like going to be mutant DNA? Is it going to have a different effect in each one of the characters? Or is it just going to be match for match, which would make sense in the budget, which is, a bit of a bummer because that's probably where they're going to go, because you've got the same assets ready to use, the same particle effects and special effects in general. So I think both the characters are there. I still feel just like that I don't see the purpose of Priscilla other than just giving us a glimpse of Nick Fury's life. I find a lot of her segments boring, which is a bummer because I feel that there's a lot of missed opportunities there.
Yeah, I agree. And again, it's just she's there to provide the heart for the show, but again, like I'm not sure that she's been built enough. Again, she is just like kind of a Nick Fury accessory. Speaking of Nick Fury accessories, I just had a theory there off the top of my head, like as you were kind of speaking and kind of making me think, and that we actually didn't see Gaia. We saw Gaia in action this week, and she's great with a gun, don't get me wrong. But we didn't see her kind of use any superpower, which you would feel that if she knew she had, she would. So that leads me to kind of believe maybe she either hasn't explored it beyond the healing properties of Extremis, or does she get more powers next week? Like, we do have a MacGuffin in the Harvest, and that ultimately is probably going to get used in some way. Does Gaia end up kind of ingesting that, however it is, and then end up kind of is that how we see her kind of scale her powers out to kind of match Gravix? I don't know. I'm just kind of thinking out loud here, but it's one way to kind of do that. Go for it.
It is. I've got another theory based on
Go for
that.
it.
It's going slightly different, but it's to do with the harvest DNA. First question I had when the grave opened up and you could see the vial there was like, I wonder specifically whose DNA that is.
Yeah.
And I'm doubling down on my prediction from last week. The vial survives and it's presented to the vice president, who's going to be Commander Ross, General
Nice.
Ross,
Nice.
Thunder,
Good show.
Thunderbolt Ross. And that's going to be the Hulk DNA.
Right.
This is going to be how we're going to have a Red Hulk.
That's our
Are we
Red
going to see
Hulk.
Red Hulk anytime soon? No, it's going to be in the Thunderbolts, if that.
Yeah.
But I'm sticking with this. It's out there. It's going to annihilate their budget if they have to get Harrison Ford in. But I think this is how we're going to see Red Hulk.
Have you seen the interview with Harrison Ford where he acts totally dumb, and he did it very believably, but he's also one of the best actors of all time in saying that he'd never heard of Red Hulk? You know what I mean? He's like, what is red? There's a Red Hulk. And it's like, oh, okay, maybe he was bluffing us. Like,
Yeah, I mean, because he has admitted that the stuff he stars in, it's a job for him, and he doesn't really like this stuff.
Yeah.
And he doesn't like the fans that much. The way he treats action figures is fucking appalling. I like the guy should be fined for that. But especially like that time he broke that hot toy on like
Oh, that was amazing. That was amazing. That's one of my favorite segments ever.
I cried. So yeah, I haven't seen the interview to answer your question now,
Okay.
but that's interesting. Like, does he know what's going on?
Yeah.
Does he care, or is he just
I think he might have. I originally was like, yeah, he's just Harrison Ford. And he doesn't give a shit, and that's okay because he's still so fucking cool. But now I'm like, does he actually know? And he's just a really good actor, and he's just bluffing us, saying, "I've never even heard of that," to throw us off and get us thinking, well, you would have heard of that if it was a part of it. Interesting. I don't know. We're getting into pure theory.
yeah, because we know him though, that could be a thing. Like he could be like, do you guys need me for this CG stuff? Right, I'm going home.
Yeah.
So maybe he doesn't know about Red Hulk.
That all options are on the table here.
This is it.
Speaking of options on the table, I want to talk about Sonya, who made a much welcome return this week. The show is just at a different level when Olivia Colman is on screen. I really want to see more of her. I don't want it to be a one and done, but that kind of got me thinking, what do we think is going to happen with Sonya? Because on one hand, I'm thinking this week, Sonya's the new Fury. Like, it looks like we could be saying goodbye to Fury at the end of the season. We'll discuss that kind of separately. But like Sonya, I would love to see be the new Fury. Because we have Contessa on the other side, like, and then you're like, okay, like, I don't know, like, then Sonya could be the good version of that on the flip side, you know what I mean, against the Thunderbolt. So, like, I would love to see that. Or do we think maybe she could be a Skrull? That's still in play, in theory, a big double bluff. Or could she be like maybe a tragic emotional casualty in the final episode? What are you thinking in terms of Olivia Colman? Olivia Colman, by the way, seems like she's having an absolute ball.
Yeah.
And she's doing amazing. So I don't know. What are your thoughts?
She's established herself as a fan favorite, so there is going to be an outcry for more people, sorry, I should say, to get her onto the screen. This is literally what we've seen happen, in my opinion, with Loki. He was so over in the first Thor movie. I think the plan was definitely to bring him back for the Avengers, but maybe like he had a lot of his dialogue and stuff rewritten to give that fan service out. But we definitely wouldn't have gotten a Loki TV show or the introduction to Infinity War if it wasn't for, I'd say, the fan popularity and Tom Hiddleston's amazing ability to really kind of play that up more and more. Let me show at Comic-Con dressed and in full Loki character. Like, that was a stroke of genius. So I think Fallsworth could have the same effect. I think we may actually see her become something significant in the universe because of the fact that she's the most popular thing about the show, and like, let's face it, she is arguably the best thing to come out of the show.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I don't know what role she's going to fill. I mean, we have to look at her character now. She is in the SAS, so that's like, you know, a national organization. Is she going to be offered promotion? Is something else going to happen? And as the Marvel Cinematic Universe veers more and more away from its source material, I've always been wondering, when are they going to come up with like an original idea that hasn't ever been rooted in the comics? So could there be a new organization um that we see? I mean, we've seen a few different ones, like I think Agents Shield mentioned AIM, and of course we've had Shield, Saber, and then a few different options. So I don't know, maybe we could go completely different routes.
Interesting. Yeah, but I definitely would like more. By the way, I say contested there. I don't know why it's Valentina, obviously. Julie Louis-Dreyfus, absolute legend, no disrespect intended. Fury, we got a revelation here. By the way, I don't know, did you pick up on that where he called the battle at the end of Endgame the Battle of Earth, which I don't think we've heard before, which for me,
Yeah,
that is the worst name for an epic battle, probably since Game of Thrones season 7, where they had that epic battle with Daenerys going apeshit with the dragon, and they call it the Loot Train. And I'm like, what? Loot Train? What a
yeah.
awful name, by the way, if that is the name for that. But the revelation about harvesting Avenger DNA, for me, does this beat Ultron as the biggest own goal by someone involved with the Avengers in MCU history? Because this was an awful idea that was always going to go badly, and I don't see why he thought it would go well, knowing what he knew at Endgame. Like, it's almost betraying the character how stupid this move is, but I'm willing to kind of go along with it for now. But what are your thoughts on this revelation?
My thoughts are that he did it as a means to keep this sort of stuff out of the wrong hands. You know, the usual. Once again, it's very much a trope in comics. But I think then once it was harvested, for sake of a better phrase, that then he saw the potential. Maybe there was like a bit of an experiment because he's already done this. He's done this in the first Avengers movie with the Hydra technology that he was like developing for Shield agents. So I instantly thought watching it that he's removing the DNA because someone is very much going to do this. I mean, we see it in real world events. Every time there's a tragedy or a war or some public figure dies, people are trying to get photographs, trying to get mementos and stuff like this. So you would have to imagine if this happened in a real world setting, you would have a bunch of treasure hunters going, and you found like, you know, a super powered individual like he mentions Carol Danvers or Wanda Maximoff or anyone that had, like, you know, was I don't want to say a mega tier because we haven't seen that as much yet, but like nearly a planet ending threat. Even someone like Thanos, who we maybe imagine his DNA was dusted, but maybe it was a cleanup. And then once he had all of this DNA, maybe it was like destroying it might be the wrong thing. Let's just hang on to it because we've lost Tony. What happens if we lose Hulk? What happens if we lose Thor? You know, a cloning is a thing that is very, very. It's a strong element that exists in the Marvel universe, mainly with the Spider-Man clone storyline, which ran through the entirety of the '90s. It was a massive, convoluted, like, you know, storyline that the fans look back not so fondly on, which is a bummer because I genuinely liked some of it. But cloning does exist. It's a major issue in the MCU. So was this an effort to clone Avengers 2.0 and maybe do his own Secret Skull thing? So you have someone with the nobility Captain America, with the strength of the Hulk, the genius of Iron Man, and some maybe the thunder powers of Thor. So you have an Avenger, not the Avengers.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Okay. Interesting. And then obviously shortly after this revelation, we got the ending, and we've kind of touched on this already, but now kind of give a bit of room to speculate. It's time kind of motioning to someone off screen. Again, there were strong implications of Danvers to the point that, yeah, the more we talk about it, the more I'm like, that's a total red herring. They're just setting us up well. But for me, like, I'd find it very, and again, I'm not saying that I don't think it will happen just because I'd be disappointed with it. Like, if anything, Marvel TV finales tend to not have big cameos or anything dramatic. They tend to just stick with the world and the characters we've met along the way and resolve that. But it would be disappointing if it was just Gaia, because the way that they had it be, it's time to finish this. Like, the way that they had it be someone that's off screen and they just didn't hint it suggested someone we haven't seen so far. So if it was just like, oh yeah, it's me, the most obvious person you could be talking to, Gaia, I felt like they should have given us that if it was Gaia. But that is to say that they didn't just fuck up there. Do you think it's a red herring, or is there someone else that we're perhaps not seeing? Like Rambo could be in there, I suppose.
It's not that I don't think it will be. I want it to be someone else.
Mm.
I unfortunately like. I mean, we're going to think about how the logic behind this is. Like, how are they going to be able to afford this? How could they justify spending a certain amount of money doing this? And I think with Captain Marvel being such a prominent element in the Infinity Saga, that bringing her in now just feels almost cheap. I think bringing in someone that has been introduced in this saga, we'll just continue to call it the Kang saga till we know any better. Someone that was like a serious player in this, they should be brought in. Someone who was powerful, popular, but we haven't seen more of. And I already mentioned, but I'd love to see Shang-Chi being just reminded that he's there. Because you want to talk about a power level. Look at the end of that movie. He's flying around in a mythological setting on the back of a dragon, like chucking rings at demons. I mean, this is awesome. And like from my point of view, if I was facing a world-ending threat, the person that I'd be calling in if I was director of Shield would always be Doctor Strange, because his power level is absolutely insane. And people always say like it's between Thor and Captain Marvel are the two strongest Avengers, but I think the reason why they specifically made Doctor Strange like hold back that entire tsunami at the end of Endgame, not just was to allow Tony to reach his crescendo, because like he genuinely, I think he could have like really taken it to Thanos, like almost as much as Wanda and Captain Marvel did. So magic also has that element where it exists outside the realm of the physical universe, outside of chemistry and physics and stuff. So he's the guy I call in. I don't think it's gonna be Doctor Strange,
Yeah.
but maybe that's why like we need like a bit more of this magic thing, because I thought that's how they were gonna be focusing going forward with this sort of stuff. So going back and answering your question after just doing nothing but speculating, I think it's either going to be Gaia or Captain Marvel. Monica Rambeau is definitely a close second, but is it going to be something absolutely universe shattering? As much as I wish, no. I would love if it was Reed Richards, or what else do we have coming up? Okay, they couldn't be the X-Men.
Yeah, no, it's definitely not X-Men.
It's
They're not
ridiculous.
they're not using
Charles
this for
Xavier
X-Men.
shows up and just like starts mind wiping everyone. It's like done. The finale's 8 minutes long. That's not happening. But Jesus Christ, do I want something ridiculous to happen? But
Yeah.
no, we're not going to get.
Yeah,
it.
no,
We're
let's
going those three.
we're after flirting with so many ideas now that even though we've said that it's not going to be that, it will still be disappointing when it's not something, because we've just put ourselves in that moment where it's like, imagine.
Yeah,
Like if it's anything less than Wolverine, I'm going to be pissed, is what I'm saying.
yeah. And this is Marvel's greatest weakness and power. It's just like
Yeah.
anything can happen, but most often it doesn't.
Yeah,
So,
and that
there's the
probably is,
potential.
it probably is the right call in a story perspective. Like it'd be so random. And what I liked is like, and that's, to be honest, that's what I think like the most recent season finale of a Marvel TV. So She-Hulk did really well because you had the balls of wall stuff happening, and then you had her go into the fourth wall and go, "Is this working for you? This seems a bit random." And I'm like,
Yeah.
"Yeah, actually, that's how we'd feel if it actually happened and we got what we wanted, because it has to make sense within the story." So yeah, I do agree. It probably is Gaia, but there's an outside chance it could be Danvers, and a smaller chance it could be Rambo. She is there. She did get called to Fury the last time we saw her, so by a Skrull, so it's not beyond the realms of possibility. But they're the only three who reasonably have a tie to this story, with Gaia being a heavy favorite. There's so many other things I want to discuss, but I am conscious of time. So ahead of the final episode, I want to do like a lightning round, okay, of things that can happen. So just real quick answers, and I have a few questions that I want to come across, and we can jump back to anything that's particularly interesting at the end if we need to. So the questions are: will we see Fury die?
No.
I'd agree. I don't think he's dying. Will we see Evil Rhodey as War Machine?
I think we'll see human Rhodey, but evil Rhodey, I don't think so.
Okay, interesting. Will we see Gaia versus Gravik? That's a given.
Yo, 100%. Yeah, we have to. Otherwise, like, there's no payoff.
Will someone else get in the fridge?
I hope not, because the only option is Sonya.
Yeah, or Priscilla as well. Priscilla's high frigid potential.
Yeah, so
Um,
there's no fucking characters. It doesn't matter.
you're like fridge away, lads.
I hate, because she was one of my favorite shows of all time is Law and Order, and she was a
Yeah,
brilliant character in that. So it's just I can't care about her. I'm
yeah,
sorry.
yeah. Will we get any more surprising secret scroll reveals?
Potentially, yeah. I think God, 50-50. I still think there's a chance that Sonya could
Yeah.
be Skrull. And also there's the fan theory that there's two Nick Furies. One of them is a Skrull and the other one is Nick himself. So that's an option.
Will we see everything in the story get wrapped up nicely, or is it going to be messy and kind of bleed into other projects?
No, it's the Marvel Cinematic Universe, so it's like you really want the real finale. We'll watch the next shit we got coming out.
Yeah, 100%. I think we get it. It's like, yeah, it's gonna
That's comic books.
end nicely until the post credit, and then the post credit just blows everything up, and that's what we want. We like that. That's fine. We're fine with that. Any other kind of predictions that I haven't touched on there?
Not predictions, just more wants. I don't want a lot of just senseless deaths. I'd like I don't want Gravix to die. I think like stick him on the raft. You spend so much time building up these characters for almost what's starting to feel like now, because there's so much content, like a cheap delivery. It's like, this guy's the bad guy. This guy's a genuine threat. Now this guy's dead. Hurrah! The heroes won. I don't want that. I want these threats to be built up and for them to stay in the universe the way it works in comics. You rarely have a villain death in comics. In fact, someone once said that you see more hero deaths in comics than you do villain deaths, because they have to be there to keep the story rolling around. So the fact that a lot of characters are just like dying so much, and we talked about Kang so many times, just being defeated by Ant-Man in such an unbelievable way, as in we can't believe it, not that it was amazing. So I think we need to build up this rogues gallery and keep them ready to go when we need to pull one of them out of the hat. So I I don't really see the purpose in anyone being snuffed out in this.
Yep.
The closest one will probably be Gaia.
Yeah, although I do think she's definitely going to be there as the new Talos substitute. But again, yeah, she is. There's potential there, 100%. That is next week, and we're going to be back to discuss it all. And yeah, also I think what we should do, and I think it's good to do around the time, is we'll do our Marvel TV show rankings as well. So
Yeah.
we'll do that as well at the end of this and see where this fits in. Before we finish up, just a general comic book or Marvel or comic book project based question from Clueless Nerd. Adam on Twitter got on and asked a very good question. He said, do you think superheroes will ever be as hot again as they were with Avengers Endgame? The genre really peaked with that, and I don't think it will ever be that good again. Your thoughts?
That's actually a really good question, because I think I see exactly what the viewer is saying, because like it was really starting. I've always described comics as modern mythology. Like when people look back in our culture in 1,000 years, they'll see a lot of similarities between ancient Greece and Rome and what we're doing now. We wear these characters like on our persons with t-shirts, stuff like that. We carry lunch boxes with their stuff in it. When a new big movie's coming out, you see these giant, like whether they be inflatable or fiberglass, like statues constructed outside cinemas. Like it's almost come to a point of worship. And with that peaking during Endgame, I can see exactly what they were saying. However, there was like a lot of major surges in comic books in general. The mainstream peaked, I'd say, with Endgame, but I would argue that maybe the beginning of the end of the golden age and silver age of comics, which would have been the 50s late into the 60s, was probably a height for it as well. So will we see that again? I think yes. The popularity of both that time, when it really shifted over into a different way of writing comic books in the 60s, and then what we saw during the peak of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, will happen in the same way. No, these things never do. But a lot of people always say in these situations that that will never happen again, and I've never been a believer of that. Once again, bringing it back to wrestling, we've said that several times. That person will never work for that company. We'll never see heights like this again. People are starting to say now that we're on the cusp of a surge in popularity because of the writer's strike, I just saw it on a TikTok there, which brought up a good point, that wrestling is really going to excel in this time where you don't need your atypical writers and they're not affected by this, whereas the rest of anything that we're used to storytelling will. So I definitely think the peak that we've seen with the end of Endgame was very, very unique. So all it's going to take is someone sitting in front of their drawing desk right now that's like getting an idea, or someone that's sitting in front of a computer that's writing a script, something like the comic book industry and the movies that come from it and the merchandising and everything that spawns from those 24 pages we read every month, because it's rooted so heavily in creativity. All it's going to take is one person, one good idea that could start a revolution that could take things to their heights. A great example was comic books probably had one of their worst periods during the 1990s. So you had guys like Jim Lee, Todd McFarlane, Rob Liefeld leaving these big companies like DC and Marvel and starting Image Comics, which had such a knock-on effect through the entire industry. And if that didn't happen then, the comics we enjoy the way we enjoy them now wouldn't exist at all. So now that didn't reach those sort of heights, but something like that can start a chain of events that really can revolutionize an industry where people want to read good stories and view good art. So I genuinely think that the surge we saw in the 50s and 60s versus what we saw at the peak of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, I think we're going to see another iteration where comics explode in popularity again, but it'll be different. As far as cinema goes, I mean, it's the highest grossing movie of all time. So we're at the stage now where if Marvel want to like climb up one more tier, the only person they have to beat now is their own record. So I think we'll see it, but I think it'll be in a very, very different way because that's how creativity always operates.
Yeah, I 100% agree, particularly with the last point you made. That's a fantastic point. And the first thing that came to mind was for me, we have Oppenheimer releasing this week. So with that in mind, I've been going through a lot of old Christopher Nolan movies. One of those movies I went through, obviously, was the last time everyone said superhero movies peaked and would never arrive back at The Dark Knight. Okay. And arguably, like a lot of people, if you were to turn around and say that's the best ever superhero movie, I wouldn't argue with you. You know, for me, it's Infinity War Endgame, 1A, 1B. Whichever way you want to turn it, just depends on my mood, which I want to watch. If I want to feel really sad or if I want to feel really invigorated. But then Dark Knight is short after it. And I remember, and that was released in 2008, obviously the same year, famously, that Iron Man was released. And then I remember in 2012 going to see The Dark Knight Rises and being like, because now I'm like, oh, look what you can do with comic book movies. Look what Christopher Nolan's doing. And I wasn't even paying even much attention to the MCU at that time. They were just kind of some fun movies I was watching in the background. And, but again, I was like, this is the future of comic book movies. And I was devastated to learn that Christopher Nolan was going to finish it at 3 and that was it. And he was wrapping it up and he was stepping away from creating more Batman movies. I'm like, what's going to happen? It's never going to get this good again. Well, of course, that movie was released in 2012, which was the same year the first Avengers movie was released, and we saw where that went. So what I'd say to you, Adam, is I'd say the peak you're referring to is in terms of this layered Marvel Cinematic Universe style storytelling. I don't think we'll ever get like 24 movies all linked together, building to one amazing climax in the same way Avengers Endgame did, because that is something that is almost impossible to do. But that doesn't mean that that's as good as it gets. That isn't the only way to tell stories, and that isn't going to be as good as it gets, because before that happened, we thought we got as good as it got with The Dark Knight Rises or The Dark Knight. And when that happens, again, it's like Dan says, it's just someone coming up with a different way to spin the genre. And when that does, we know the stories hit for us. We know we enjoy them. We keep coming back to them. Even now, when we're kind of in a dip, a lull in quality in both Marvel and DC, and we're kind of waiting for the next thing to come along, and maybe that thing would be James Gunn's universe and whatever spin he decides to put on it, or maybe it'll be something completely out of the blue. You look at the likes of Invincible on Amazon Prime and what they're doing. You look at what The Boys are doing as well. Like, there's some amazing adult-based stories being told. Even Deadpool 3 is now coming, even tying in with Marvel, but that's more adult-based storytelling. Is that not technically amazing storytelling as well? Is that not up there with the peak of comics? But it's just completely different. It's TV. It's showing Marvel up in terms of like quality for how you can make a good superhero TV show and how you can make it adult based as well. And then again, like, you have stuff that's still out there that has yet to be even touched. Like, I think a Saga, you know what I mean? That's one of my favorite comics. And I'm like, someone is going to like adapt that one day in the same way they said, and for years it was true, that you could never adapt Dune. And people view Saga in that way as well. And I'm like, someone's going to get that right. And when they do, holy fucking shit, the world is not ready for that.
Yeah.
And if you haven't read Saga, go read it. It's amazing. It's like Star Wars, Game of Thrones, and then just a regular comic book story all mashed into one incredibly.
To
So
round that out, there's one more point I want to make
go
that
for it.
everyone always forgets about, that it was hugely culturally significant at the time, and it spawned so many ideas, including a lot of the ones we're used to in the MCU. But when Blade first came out, the original Wesley Snipes one, the fanfare that received, this is still in the VHS era, this is pre-DVD.
Yeah.
They were saying that this is as good as superhero movies can get,
Yeah.
because it forgoes the typical formula. And if you look at a lot of the things, like the 3-point stance, which they mocked obviously in the Black Widow movie, was invented by Wesley Snipes. Like, it may have been done in movies before that, but he was the first person to consciously say that this is the most superheroic pose you can do in the real world. And that movie, like, you know, it heavily influenced the Matrix, every superhero movie that came after it. And people genuinely thought, because it reached such a mainstream audience, being R-rated or 18 over in Western Europe, that it was, they thought that that's as far as it can go, because everything else is childish and silly, and they just won't have the same impact. So we've already forgotten that Blade was seen as the greatest superhero movie that ever existed, and it could never be topped. Then, like you said, we had The Dark Knight. I mean, even before that, you could argue we had the 1989 Batman movie.
Yeah.
So people are always going to be outdoing each other, and they have, Marvel themselves have the formula. James Gunn has been part of that formula, so like you said, he could very easily take what he's learned, look at the shortcomings of Marvel, and really do something very, very unique. And let's face it, when people say name a superhero to, you know, a muggle out in the street, it's going to be Batman or Superman. They're always going to have the front running name mentioned. So you're talking about the original biggest superheroes. So with that behind him and his experience, there is definitely a chance that he could do something pretty spectacular.
Yeah, there's a lot of hope. And again, just thinking back to the amount of times people have said it'll never get this good, and exactly what you're saying, and history shows us time and again, it always gets better. So a lot to be excited about, and a lot to be excited about. Even with us, Dan, next week we're going to be talking about finale. But in the meantime, before I let you go, I do want to say a big happy birthday, Dan. Obviously, a big milestone. Dan's turning 21. So congratulations, legal age to drink in America.
Yeah.
So congratulations, enjoy that, and yeah, I look forward to being back here to chat with you next week on page 180. Always a pleasure. Thanks, Dan.